Hello friends, and welcome back to my channel. You'll notice we're set up very casually here in the studio today. I've just gotten back from BMXNet conference in Berlin and it was incredible. And shortly before the conference, I was busy moving my partner Brian in to live with me, and the house is it's a little mid-move, so my normal filming area is not quite in use today, but sitting down for a little bit more of a casual chat felt perfect for me because I have a video that I was just inspired to make after talking to some folks at BMXNet about trauma dumping in regards to the piercing industry. And more specifically, there were a few good roundtable classes at BMX. I wasn't able to make it to most of them because I was busy facilitating, but I was interested in some of the topics of conversation that came up based off of them. And trauma dumping was one that I kept encountering. And trauma dumping as a concept is when people without consent or without communication to the people around them just start talking about really severe trauma that has happened to them, potentially in a way that's maybe triggering to the listener, potentially in the way that puts the listener in an awkward position of needing to now have this very heavy interaction with someone that maybe they weren't prepared for, and maybe they aren't, able or ready to deal with, or maybe, whatever the case may be, it's just not really the time and place for it. And so I was seeing a lot of conversations surrounding how we as piercers deal with trauma dumping in the piercing room. And there were quite a few folks who were complaining about very regularly experiencing trauma dumping from clients and feeling like they didn't know what to do to combat it, but it was really exhausting for them and really overwhelming for them as a piercer, and they weren't really sure what to do about it. And this is a topic that's a bit of a difficult one for me, if I'm being totally honest, because I can relate to what those other piercers are feeling. In the past, I've worked at studios that had pretty strict time limits for piercers. They wanted us to do piercings within a certain time span to fit as many clients in within a day. And I typically take usually an hour for my genital piercing appointments because they tend to be more involved piercings that necessitate more time. I need to have more conversations with clients about it. On average, it's more likely that I'm doing a genital piercing for, let's say, a trans client where I need to have certain conversations about HRT and bottom surgery and things like that. Or I'm doing genital piercings for clients who are looking for them as a bodily reclamative experience after trauma. So we're having these heavy conversations about trauma. And at studios where I felt very pressured to pierce quickly and try and, pierce faster than an hour for that, I definitely felt a level of burnout if I had 2, 3, 4 genital piercing appointments in a day and clients were coming in and trying to talk through all of this trauma that brought them in to get pierced. And I felt very much like I just had no break. I had no respite between it. It was very overwhelming for me as a trauma survivor myself. So I get it. I really do. I definitely have had days where I have been I just need someone to come in and get a helix piercing because they think it's cute and not need to tell me this horrific thing that has happened to them that I just do not at this present moment have the capacity to hold. So I know what it's like to feel that way and have those days. What I thought was more interesting about the conversations that I heard at BMX is that many folks it almost felt like blaming the clients in these situations and saying well, I just can't handle this. I'm just at capacity. I'm feeling burnt out. I'm overworked. Maybe there's studio structures at the studio I was at where, piercers didn't feel like they had the time to take the time with those clients. Maybe there's stuff going on in that piercer's personal life. Whatever the case may be, it was more than they could handle. And I want to state that I think that having these boundaries as a piercer is important, is valid, is knowing where that line is for you is crucial. However, and of course there's a however, when I think of my own personal experience when I felt overwhelmed by what felt like trauma dumping to me, I don't think it was the client's fault for coming in and wanting to share these heavy experiences and it being back to back to back and overwhelming for me. I think if there were fault to be found in that situation, I think the fault laid in the studio pressuring me with time. I knew that I had like a statistically higher possibility of having a client come in who needed a bodily reclamative service that would involve discussing trauma and would involve heavier things. And so I think having support from the studio of being like, okay, you can take an hour for genital piercings because you are typically dealing with these clients who need this extra time more often. And this extra time allows you to work more thoughtfully with a client and then take a breather that I need before going from that heavy experience into the next experience. I could see it potentially being the fault of my scheduling. Maybe if I know that I'm typically getting a lot of these services, I should set a limiter and say, okay, I only take 2 genital piercing appointments a day. Because if both of them are really, really, really emotionally heavy and we're talking about heavy trauma and we're talking about potentially like sexual assault or physical assault or violence or things like this, I only have the mental capacity to handle 2 of these services a day. Maybe if I know that there are things going on in my personal life that are making that capacity even smaller, I need to limit my schedule to only 1 of those services a day. Maybe if I know I'm reaching that capacity, I need to take a mental health day and I need to take a day off from the studio and very intentionally use that day to meditate or to journal or to get out in nature or to just eat an edible and not exist on this planet for a couple of hours on my couch or whatever like coping and resetting looks like for me. But I find it very interesting that many of us in the piercing community seem to jump to clients are trauma dumping and I need to figure out a way to set boundaries in the piercing room and basically tell clients like, hey, I'm here to do this piercing for you, but I'm not here to be your therapist. I'm not here to talk to you about this trauma. I'm not here to do all of this. And I think if that is a way that you wish to pierce, that is okay. If piercing for you looks like setting that boundary and saying, hey, I'm not here for all of this, I think that's fine. However, I then do not think you should advertise trauma-informed services. I do not think you should advertise or talk about bodily reclamation through piercing. I do not think you should advertise or talk about piercings as a ritual, spiritual process that allows us to heal from and overcome traumas. Because here's the thing. I think if we are advertising our services in this way, whether it's blatant, whether you say, I am a trauma-informed piercer, if you have trauma, please seek me out, I'm a safe person for you to work with, or whether we advertise it in a less direct way. Maybe we talk about the power of bodily reclamation through piercing on our page. Maybe we share infographics from piercers about the way piercings can help people heal. Maybe we share information about the history of piercing as a ritual and a rite of passage. If you are advertising to clients that you offer a service that includes bodily reclamation and trauma processing and trauma-informed care, which often looks like creating a safe space for people to talk about their trauma, right? Like if we are saying, okay, I want to be a safe space for trauma-informed care, and I have a client who's coming in to see me to say, let's say, get a genital piercing as a way of reclaiming their body after sexual assault, part of that is talking to the client about their sexual assault if they would like to. If for a client to tell me, these are certain places where I don't want to be touched if possible during today's procedure because I have this trauma. Or, certain sounds or certain music will be triggering for me because I have this trauma and here's what I associate it with and here's what I need. For a client to look in the mirror and see their new piercing and then cry or get emotional afterwards because it brings things up for them. Trauma-informed care is saying, I am here for you to talk about all these things. It's saying that if you would like, I will hold you when you cry afterwards and we can cry together. If you would like space, I will give you space. If you need to talk to me about what happened during your assault so I understand the weight that this piercing carries for you, I will be here for this. Trauma-informed care says, I am not a therapist. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a doctor. I don't have that clinical training. But I have specific training about working with trauma, and I am here to hold space for your trauma, and I am here to provide an experience that is as affirming as possible. And I will do everything in my power, short of filling in for the role of therapist or doctor or medical professional, to allow you to have this safe experience being pierced with me, even if that looks like needing to talk explicitly about your trauma, even if that looks like needing to take time with you when you cry, even if that looks like needing in a longer appointment time, like whatever that looks like, if I'm advertising these services, then inherently, I don't think trauma dumping can happen in the piercing room. It almost to me strikes me as a therapist coming off of a session and venting to another therapist and being like, oh my God, this person just trauma dumped on me so bad. Can trauma dumping really occur in a space that is specifically created and structured to create trauma-informed care? And I say this nervous and knowing that I feel like I will immediately get some pushback from piercers who've been in similar situations who are like, well, my boundaries matter, like my limitations matter. And listen, I think if you get in the room with a client and they immediately decide to start telling you extremely graphic details about violence that occurred to them, or forcing you to watch videos or recordings of graphic details of violence that occurred to them that is triggering to you, like that stuff's not cool, right? But if we are creating a space that is supposed to be trauma informed, if we are specifically advertising that we want to offer reclamative services and help clients with this, inherently we are saying this is a safe space to talk about your trauma. This is a safe space to unpack your trauma. This is a safe space to process your trauma. The processing of a piercing is going to look different than the processing of a therapy session or a psychiatry session or a group counseling meeting, but it is still a form of processing trauma. And if we want to open ourselves up for that, we have to be prepared to hold space. And I cannot fathom how I can see so many piercers post online that they specialize in trauma-informed care, that they want to offer all these things, and then behind closed doors at industry events are complaining about clients trauma dumping. And I say this as someone who has been guilty of it myself. Like, again, when I worked at that studio where they were really encouraging me to speed up my genital piercings, I had a time period where I definitely put the blame on clients for me feeling burnt out and overwhelmed and like I was being trauma dumped on by all of these things happening. But now that I've had the time to process and I've gotten out of that bad mental state, I realized that the responsibility wasn't on the clients for that. That the reason why I was feeling so burnt out and so overwhelmed and like my boundaries weren't being respected was because the studio wasn't giving me enough time to do the piercings in a way that allowed me to truly offer trauma-informed care. Like, I well knew that I needed an hour. Did every VCH or Frenum piercing take me an hour? No. But if a client did come in and need to have those heavy conversations, I had more time in the appointment to sit and talk with them. And I usually, even taking that extra time to converse, had an extra 5 or 10 minutes before my next appointment where I could go sit outside in the sun for a couple of minutes and just reset. I could go take a drink of water. I could go like meditate for a couple minutes. I could go look at a cat video on my phone. I could emotionally regulate myself to be prepared for the next piercing. It was also personal responsibility. I was dealing with some very difficult things in my personal life that were making me have a lower emotional capacity on the day-to-day. I should have checked in with myself and said, okay, I am at a reduced capacity. Maybe I limit my scheduling. Maybe I only take one genital piercing appointment a day. Or maybe I have a day in my week where I don't take any. Or maybe I just need to take a mental health day. Maybe it's gotten to that point where I am feeling so burnt out and so overwhelmed that I need to just take a day and take care of myself mentally and work on that before I get back into it. But I think the responsibility was on me as a service provider. It was on me as a piercer who advertises and focuses on trauma-informed care and working with clients for these reclamative services to know my boundaries and know my limitations and build structures where I had enough time with my clients and I didn't feel rushed. Where when I knew I was at a lower emotional capacity, maybe I lowered the amount of services like this that I took, or I took the time for myself. And I worry that on one hand, we as an industry are starting to talk more about trauma-informed care and these things that I love about piercing that make piercing so magical, and sort of like advertise with this and try and create safe spaces with this. But on the other hand, as service providers are not doing the internal work we need to do in order to actually provide these services for our clients. We're not checking in with ourselves about our limitations and our boundaries. We're not setting boundaries in a way that allow us to take the mental health time we need. We are, I fear, at risk of re-traumatizing our clients because we've advertised and built up and promoted this safer space. And then when clients come in and seek us out for these services, if they get us on a bad day or at the end of the day or after a couple heavy appointments, we are coming into this thinking, oh my God, here's another client who's trauma dumping on me. I just want to get them out the door. And that's not an experience that a client looking for this type of service deserves. And so I would push back against this narrative that clients are trauma dumping and that piercers need to like find these ways to set boundaries. I think if you don't want to offer these types of services, that is fair. But you should advertise that clearly and set that boundary clearly. But if you do want to offer these type of services, if you do want to focus on, you know, these ritual elements, these bodily reclamative elements, gender affirming care, you know, restoring people's, you know, relationships with their body after violence, after loss, after things like this, the onus falls on us to create those safer spaces, to know our own limitations. And I think in that way, trauma dumping in the traditional sense of things doesn't exist in the same way. We cannot sit and say we are trying to create a safe space for trauma and for healing, and then when someone's trauma is heavier than we expect or more than we expect or personally triggering for us, turn around and tell that person that they are trauma dumping for seeking us out for this service that we very specifically advertised. And it does worry me how many piercers I've seen having this conversation and blaming clients in their way. It was specifically some interactions with Kevin Jump of Wholehearted Body Piercing, who I think is an incredible piercer and scar artist, an incredible person, who was talking about parasocial relationships and trauma dumping in his studio. And he basically said, I am inviting people in to build a connection with me and a relationship with me through doing these services that are oftentimes ritual in nature or spiritual in nature or emotionally heavy or important for people. In that context, parasocial relationships and trauma dumping can't really exist if I am inviting people in and trying to open up and share these connections with people. And how can I say that I am connecting with people on this level and then turn around and say, oh, it's a parasocial relationship. Oh, these people are trauma dumping. And I thought Kevin's perspective on this was a really interesting and really, really, really beautiful one. And it was those interactions that it really inspired me to want to sit down and make this video and encourage piercers to sort of reassess. I say this as a piercer who absolutely has in the past dealt with a level of overwhelm and burnout because of the emotional weight of some of the services that I take on. And I can be in that place of burnout and in that place of needing to take a step back and work on myself without blaming the clients who seek me for the services for that. I can also acknowledge that it is not a failing on me as a piercer or as a person to get overwhelmed sometimes. Therapists get overwhelmed sometimes, mental health professionals get overwhelmed sometimes, advocates get overwhelmed sometimes. Doing this type of work is difficult. It is mentally and emotionally and spiritually draining. And sometimes in our best efforts to hold space for as many people as we can, we overextend ourselves, whether because it is more than we can carry or there is more going on in our personal life that needs us. And that is not a moral failing. It is not an ethical failing. It is simply part of being a human being. And I think being able to take personal accountability in those situations that is without shame. When I feel like I need to reduce my genital services for a little bit or take a mental health day, I try and do it without shame. Note that I say try. I'm not really that successful at it. I still feel like wildly guilty for these things. I still really struggle to make myself take a mental health day. I still absolutely push myself and say yes to too many things, but that's on me. That's not on my clients. It's not my clients' fault or responsibility. It's my responsibility to learn how to manage that and manage my boundaries and manage my needs. but I do it without shame or without value judgment. There's not something wrong with me because I need to take time or take space. I am doing the right thing for myself and my clients when I do that. And when I have recuperated and I feel better, then I can return to working at the same level I was and showing up more and being there for clients. But I wonder what it would look like as an industry for those of us who do want to offer trauma-informed services, who do want to offer ritual and spiritual and cathartic services, to change that narrative, to change the narrative of, oh, clients are trauma dumping and I'm like super overwhelmed and burnt out, to I am currently at capacity for how much trauma I can hold and how much space I can hold. How do I honor my needs as an individual while still showing up for my clients? And how do I balance my limitations as a human with what my clients need from me? And I think when we change that narrative and sort of shift fault, I hate fault because I don't think there's one person at fault. I don't think there's fault here, right? I think we're all humans trying to navigate the human experience as best we can. But I think when we shift that narrative and instead of being like, oh my God, my clients are trauma dumping and it's awful, to say, I'm at a point in my life, personally or professionally, where I'm limited in how much I can carry this load. What does it look like for me to honor those limitations for myself while still showing up and being the provider my clients know, love, appreciate, and seek out? I'm interested to hear people's thoughts in the comments section below. I don't have a perfect answer. I don't know that I have an answer, right? I think this is an ongoing conversation that we as an industry need to have. But I am very curious to hear other people's perspective and also to hear if people disagree with me, because it seems like there's a growing movement of piercers really pushing to set these boundaries and to tell clients like, hey, some of this is not how you can behave in a piercing studio. And I'm curious at how people feel with me pushing back against that and my perspective of it and how I feel here, in that I think if we want to advertise these services this way, we then do not have a leg to stand on to turn around and go, oh, like this is trauma dumping. Very curious to hear your thoughts, very curious to hear your input, very open for folks who disagree with my perspective on this, and very interested to continue this conversation. And as an aside to any of my current in-person clients, please trust that I am working on upholding my boundaries and my needs. And even though I am imperfect at taking mental health time, I think I get a little bit better every year. And know that if you are seeking me out for these type of services, I do not think you are trauma dumping. I have space for you. And if I feel as though I am reaching a capacity level with that, please trust me to adjust my bookings accordingly and give myself time. Please trust me to take a mental health day. And if I do take a mental health day, please be respectful of me during that time, and please be patient with me during this time. But please know that my piercing room in my studio is always a safe space for these interactions, that I am always here for you, that I am not going to judge you for wanting to talk about or express your trauma, and that I do not believe that you should be judged for that in this industry. And I think that if we want to provide those types of services, we have to hold space for this. If that is ever something that changes for me, I'll be honest with that. And you can trust me to be honest with you about that. Thanks so much for hanging out and chatting. This one was a little bit heavy, but I'm still very curious to hear what people think. And I can't wait to sit down and chat with y'all again next week. Bye.